She walked onto the plane with a quiet grace, holding a valid first-class ticket, yet instantly judged by her appearance. What followed was public humiliation, whispers, and a seat denied, until one powerful man stepped through the cabin doors and turned everything upside down. If you feel drawn in, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have a story that will leave you speechless. The glass walls of private terminals shimmered under the late morning sun, catching reflections of designer handbags, polished brogues, and sunglasses that cost more than most mortgages. A soft hush, heavy with exclusivity, hovered in the air, punctuated only by the clink of jewelry and the distant sound of champagne being poured. Among the sleek silhouettes stood Sophia Mendez, dressed in a simple navy blue midi dress and a beige cardigan. Her heels were modest, her makeup understated. The only thing that gleamed on her was a silver watch wrapped around her wrist, a quiet relic from a chapter of life she rarely discussed aloud. It had been a gift, that watch, the day she met Eduardo Vasquez, back when she was still in uniform, walking aisles instead of boarding them. He was a young entrepreneur then, seated in 2A, reading business reports between sips of espresso. She remembered offering him a blanket before turbulence in a conversation that unfolded over the hum of the cabin. Neither of them knew then that their paths would eventually intertwine. Not in luxury, but in quiet understanding. Now, years later, her husband had insisted she fly first class for once to enjoy the comfort she so often passed up. "Take this moment, mi amor. You've earned it," he had said, pressing the ticket into her palm. He'd be joining her at the resort later, after some boardroom battle she chose not to ask about. Sophia exhaled gently and stepped toward the gate. She didn't carry the air of a billionaire's wife. She didn't need to. There was a particular strength in choosing to be unseen when you could demand attention, and in choosing dignity when ego would be so much easier. As she handed her ticket to the gate agent, Sophia glanced down at her watch, the second hand ticking in quiet rhythm, a reminder that time, not title, defines us. Around her, the lounge buzzed with shallow laughter and clinking glasses, but she stood still, rooted, unrushed, because for Sophia, luxury wasn't a seat assignment. It was knowing who you were and never needing anyone else to say it for you. The moment Sophia stepped into the first-class cabin, the air changed. It was subtle at first, a pause in conversation, a glance over the rim of a crystal flute. Then came the tightening of smiles, the slow drag of eyes across her simple dress, her soft-soled shoes, the cardigan that bore no brand logo. She walked the aisle like a ghost in a palace. Real, but not seen the way she was meant to be. She reached seat 2A and placed her carry-on gently in the overhead bin, her silver watch glinting for a moment in the warm cabin light. A voice, crisp and commanding, interrupted. "Excuse me, ma'am," said a woman with flawless posture and a perfectly pressed Navy uniform. "I think there's been a mistake. This area is reserved for first-class passengers only." The woman's badge read Camila Reynolds, and she wore her gold-striped epaulets like royal insignia. Her blonde hair was coiled into a bun, so tight it might have held up the clouds. Sophia turned to face her, calm. "I have a first-class ticket," she said softly, handing it over. Camila accepted it with 2 fingers, as if the laminated paper might smudge her manicure. Her French-tipped nails gleamed under the LED lighting as she turned the ticket over. Once, then twice, then again, a performance of disbelief. "There must be a system error," Camila said, her brows arching into exaggerated suspicion. "It happens, but not often." She glanced at Sophia's cardigan again. "Perhaps you were checked in incorrectly?" Sophia didn't move. "It's a confirmed booking. My husband made the reservation." Camila's smile twitched. "Of course," she murmured. "They always say that." Across the aisle, a man in a tailored navy suit lowered his financial newspaper, gold cufflinks catching the light. "Happens all the time," he said, voice loud enough to pierce every row. "Economy class slipping through the cracks these days." Laughter, restrained but unmistakable, spread like a slow burn through the cabin. A woman in a white silk jumpsuit leaned toward her companion and whispered, "Maybe she's someone's assistant or influencer." Her words floated unfiltered. Sophia stood straight, neither apologizing nor reacting. Her hands rested gently on the seat back. Her eyes did not flinch. Camila handed the ticket back. "Let me check if we can find a spot in the back for you. I'm sure you'll be more comfortable there." The word comfortable was delivered with a smile so sharp it could cut glass. Sophia's jaw tensed just slightly. "Please check again." Camila's eyes narrowed, voice dipping. "Security protocols are clear. No unauthorized passengers in the premium cabin. I'll just have the manager assist." Sophia touched the watch on her wrist. The metal was cool against her skin, a reminder of time, of grace, of who she'd been before anyone called her Mrs. Vasquez. A younger flight attendant approached and took the ticket again, whispering with Camila while glancing occasionally toward Sophia, then back at the manifest. A businessman tapped his armrest. "Some of us have real schedules. Can we get moving?" Camila turned back, smile now brittle. "If you wouldn't mind stepping outside the cabin while we clarify everything, that would help us keep things moving for our other passengers." She gestured toward the forward exit, not a suggestion, but an exile. Sophia didn't argue, but she also didn't move. "My reservation is valid," she said evenly, "and I have every right to sit here." The silence that followed wasn't loud, but heavy, like the moment before a storm or an apology that never comes. Camila's lips pressed together, clearly frustrated. "We can't allow just anyone in this section, without confirmation. Just anyone." The words landed with thud, not shouted, not dramatic, but deadly in implication. Sophia's face remained composed, though her throat tightened, not from shame, but from restraint. A younger version of herself might have exploded. A version still in uniform might have apologized. But now, she simply stood, still, present, unshakable. The cabin manager arrived with a tablet in hand, his posture formal but indifferent. "Ma'am," he said, not looking directly at her, "we're having some trouble verifying your ticket. I'll need to ask you to step out while we sort this." From behind his glasses, a young executive smirked into his laptop screen. A woman in a sapphire necklace clicked her tongue softly. And still, no one questioned the ones doing questioning. Sophia remained motionless, not from pride, but purpose. She could say, "I'm Sophia Vasquez. My husband owns this airline." One sentence, and the curtain would drop. But she didn't, because dignity doesn't need proof. The silver watch ticked quietly on her wrist. Behind her, the hum of conversation resumed, a murmur of assumptions, flickering screens, half-finished opinions. Ahead, the cabin door remained open, a beam of daylight cutting to the tension like a single silent spotlight. Sophia didn't speak again. She didn't need to, because sometimes the most powerful protest is refusing to disappear. The first-class cabin had settled into a restless stillness. The ambient hum of engines blended with the occasional rustle of newspapers, tapping of watches, and quiet sighs of impatience. Sophia remained standing just inside the galley entrance, her boarding pass still in her hand. The cabin manager murmuring something into his earpiece with the tone of someone solving a technical inconvenience rather than addressing human dignity. Camila stood beside him, arms crossed just tightly enough to betray her discomfort, though her smile remained carefully in place, thin, professional, false. That was when the aircraft door opened again. But this time, it did not creak. It parted, like velvet curtains drawing back before an unspoken drama. Eduardo Vasquez stepped inside, 6'2" and composed like the hush before verdict. He wore a navy Tom Ford suit tailored with such precision it seemed to move with his breath. His silver-flecked hair was immaculate, his steel blue eyes alert. No security detail, no entourage. Just him in silence. The cabin seemed to tilt around his entrance. A man near the window lowered his phone mid-text. A woman in Chanel straightened reflexively. Even the hum of the galley coffee machine seemed to dim. Whatever assumptions had filled the air moments earlier dissolved like steam. Eduardo's eyes scanned the room once, methodical, cool, unwavering, until they landed on Sophia. His gaze softened almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. He crossed the aisle with the quiet confidence of someone who did not need to announce authority, because he was the authority. "Sophia," he said gently, His voice wasn't raised, but it filled the cabin. "Is there a problem?" The cabin manager's demeanor changed instantly. His shoulders stiffened. His mouth opened as if trying to swallow his own mistake. "Sir, Mr. Vasquez, we were just resolving a small confusion with the seating." Eduardo turned to him slowly. "A confusion?" he repeated, not as a question, but as a judgment. Camila's face had lost its color. She tried to speak, but her throat seemed dry. "Yes, there seems to have been miscommunication," she added, smiling with the desperation of someone who suddenly realized the entire script had changed. Eduardo stepped beside Sophia, placing a hand gently at the small of her back. The gesture was subtle, yet claiming, protective without possession. "That's my wife's seat." "2A," he said. "Is there a reason she's not in it?" A hush fell so absolute it swallowed breath. "Your wife," Camila whispered, as if the words betrayed her. Eduardo's eyes didn't move from hers. "Yes, Sofia Mendez Vasquez. My wife. Have we forgotten to verify that?" The manager stammered. "Mr. Vasquez, I assure you that you were just following protocol." Eduardo finished. "Was your protocol to question her ticket or to question whether she looked the part?" His words were even quiet, but they landed like hammers in velvet gloves. Camila's lips parted, but no answer came. Her hands, once firmly crossed, now fidgeted at her sides. The gold on her badge caught the light. Suddenly less a decoration and more a mark of exposure. Eduardo turned toward the other passengers, his voice now reaching the full length of the cabin. "Did you know," he said, "that before she ever met me, Sophia was the youngest head flight attendant in the history of this airline?" Heads turned, necklaces stilled mid-adjustment, phones lowered. She once prevented a Madeira medical emergency before even the passenger knew something was wrong. That man lived because of her attention to detail, because of her training, because she believed that every passenger matters. His gaze moved back to Camila. And now, today, on the very airline she helped make better, she is told she doesn't belong because her cardigan doesn't match her seat assignment. Camila blinked, and a bead of sweat slid beneath her foundation. Her badge seemed to weigh more by the second. Sophia stood beside him, still silent, but her presence had shifted, taller now, even in stillness. The very air around her felt reclaimed. Eduardo spoke again, softer now. "When I asked this flight to wait a few minutes for me, it wasn't because I needed special treatment. It was because I wanted to surprise my wife after a month apart. And instead, I found this." He looked at the cabin manager, who was now clutching his hat with both hands like a man standing before a firing squad. "As majority shareholder of Stellar Airways, I will personally be reviewing this crew's conduct. And beginning tomorrow, every employee, including management, will undergo mandatory training in bias and customer dignity." Camila's jaw clenched. Her silence now wasn't composed. It was broken. "And Miss Reynolds," Eduardo added, his voice gentle but icy, "you'll be the first participant." Several passengers lowered their eyes. The businessman with the cufflinks who'd mocked Sophia now found interest in his untouched coffee. The woman in pearls shifted uncomfortably. Eduardo turned to Sophia. "Shall we sit?" She nodded once and took her seat. Eduardo placed her bag gently in the overhead compartment before settling beside her. Camila tried to recover. "Would you like a beverage, ma'am?" Sophia looked up at her. "Sparkling water, please." "Of course." Camila retreated, her steps faltering, her smile now a brittle imitation of service. Eduardo turned toward the rest of the cabin one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I apologize for the delay. To make up for it, champagne will be complimentary throughout the flight." The announcement was met with murmured thanks and embarrassed glances. But no one could unhear what had been said, and no one would forget how quietly justice had walked down the aisle. Sophia rested her hand on Eduardo's, her fingers brushing the watch she wore, the one he had given her back when they first met. She hadn't needed his name to find her seat. She only needed him to stand beside her, and for the truth to speak louder than any uniform ever could. The ocean stretched out in endless ribbons of gold, the last light of day shimmering across the water like melted coins. on the private balcony of their suite. The air was warm, salted with sea breeze, and softened by the distant murmur of waves. The resort glowed behind them, but out here, time slowed. Sophia sat curled in a lounge chair, a glass of white wine resting near her fingertips, the stem untouched. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, but her mind was elsewhere, drifting between memory and meaning. She still hadn't spoken much about the flight, not during the car ride from the airport, not during check-in, not even when Eduardo quietly ordered her favorite wine, the one from their first trip to Portugal. He sat beside her now, jacket removed, sleeves rolled, hands relaxed, except for the occasional glance in her direction that said everything he hadn't yet asked. Sophia broke the silence first. "I know I should have said something," she murmured, "about who I'm married to." Eduardo shook his head gently. "You didn't need to, but it would have stopped it." The stares, the tone in her voice. I could have ended in a sentence. He looked at her, his eyes soft beneath the twilight. "Yes, but that's not who you are." Sophia exhaled, fingers absently tracing the edge of her watch. "Sometimes I wonder if I've disappeared into your shadow. When I walk into a room, I'm not Sofia Mendez anymore. I'm Mrs. Vasquez. People listen, but they don't see me." Eduardo leaned forward slightly, his voice low and unwavering. "I see you. I always have." She met his gaze, unsure whether to believe it. He reached for her hand, gently covering the watch with his palm. "You once told me that time is the only luxury that matters," he said. "That it's what we choose to do with it, and who we share it with, that defines our lives." Sophia nodded. She had said that on the night they first danced in the galley after a delayed red-eye to Tokyo, when time still belonged to them. "That's why I created something for you," Eduardo said quietly. "Not as a gift, not as compensation, but because I believe no one understands people or service better than you." She blinked, unsure. "The position of Director of Customer Experience. It's been open for months. I had a dozen candidates lined up, but after yesterday," he smiled faintly, "there was no doubt. You're the person to lead it, not just because of what you endured, but because of who you've always been." Sophia felt a lump rise in her throat. "You planned this," she whispered. "It was supposed to be your anniversary surprise. But life, as it often does, wrote a better scene." She looked away, eyes glistening. "I miss working, not because of the paycheck, but because it made me feel useful, like I mattered." Eduardo leaned back, letting her words settle. "You never stop mattering. But if leading something again makes you feel whole, then let's start tomorrow, not as Mrs. Vasquez, but as Sofia Mendez, the woman who made me fall in love on flight 1413, because she treated every person as if they mattered." Sophia laughed softly through the tears she hadn't meant to shed. The ocean breathed steadily below them, eternal and calm. She took his hand and rested it over her heart. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's begin again." And just like that, the tide turned. The sun crested the horizon like a promise, casting soft amber light across the tarmac as the first flight of the day prepared for boarding. Morning dew glistened on the wings of the Stellar Airways jet, and beyond the glass walls of headquarters, a new day was already in motion. Inside the training hall, flight attendants sat in neat rows, not just new recruits, but veterans too. At the front stood Sofia Mendez Vasquez, not in heels or pearls, but in a tailored navy blazer and flats, her posture calm, her presence unmistakable. She didn't speak loudly. She didn't need to. Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had lived every word she now spoke. "We don't serve passengers," she told the room. "We serve people. And people deserve dignity, not because of what they wear or how they speak, but because of who they are." Behind her, a screen glowed with the new stellar mandate: service rooted in respect. The reforms were already taking shape. Bias awareness training was now mandatory across all departments. Anonymous feedback channels allowed employees and customers to report misconduct without fear. A new mentorship program paired junior staff with seasoned professionals, including Sophia herself. Even the uniforms have been redesigned, sleeker, more functional, with subtle touches inspired by Sophia's own flight days. Camila Reynolds, no longer smug but surprisingly attentive, now co-led on boarding sessions under Sophia's guidance, learning not just to manage service, but to embody it. Sophia walked the terminals quietly, sometimes helping carry a stroller, other times refilling a water dispenser without fanfare. To many, she was just another director in a blazer. But among the staff, she had become something rarer, a leader who listened. One morning, a new attendant whispered to a colleague, "That's her, the one from the flight, the one they tried to move to economy." The other replied, "No way, she runs the whole department now." And still, Sophia never corrected them, because what mattered wasn't recognition, it was transformation. Later that week, Eduardo watched in the glass bridge as her plane lifted into the dawn, bound for a regional base she insisted on visiting personally. She had asked not for a ceremony, but for a clipboard, a seat map, and a chance to observe without being noticed. The engines roared, wheels left the ground, and the aircraft climbed into a sky streaked with morning gold. Some people inherit leadership. Some claim it, but others, like Sofia Mendez Vasquez, earn it quietly, one flight at a time. And often, the ones the world underestimates are exactly the ones who rise to change it. In a world where appearances often overshadow truth, Sophia's journey reminds us that dignity isn't worn, it's lived. This is more than just one of many emotional stories or touching stories. It's a call to look deeper, act kinder, and challenge the quiet biases around us. Let this be part of the waves of justice that reshape how we treat one another. If her story stirred something in you, don't let it end here. Share it, reflect on it, because sometimes the most powerful unraveled fates begin with one moment of silent courage.